Hi, Scott Walker here. Of all places, we're doing our Facebook Live at Lambeau Field, home of the world champion, 13-time world champion, Green Bay Packers. I like to say Lambeau Field. In fact, actually, there's a tour group going on, so you may hear them cheer, "Go Pack, go," in just a moment. See, pretty good? We're live right here. Go figure that. Kind of cool. But we're here in Lambeau Field. We thought we were just in Green Bay today, actually down in De Pere for an announcement about a STEM project here in Brown County. And we're loving the fact that we get a chance to come here in Lambeau Field and do our Facebook Live session. Just a minute, I got a couple questions from folks who joined us on Facebook and Twitter in advance and sent some questions in. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can over the next half hour or so. And right off the bat, though, one important thing to talk about is the fact that our state budget just came out just over a week ago Wednesday. In that state budget, we were able to take the reform dividend, which is the benefit of the reforms of the last 6 years, our economic and fiscal reforms. In fact, from an economic standpoint, it's great to report that we now have more people employed this past year in Wisconsin than ever before in our state's history. We have the lowest unemployment rate we've had since, well, January of 2001, so 16 years ago. And we have one of the highest percentages of any state of adults who are actually in the workforce. So more people are working than ever before. The future's bright. We're heading in the right direction. The economy reflects that. And that's part of the reform dividend. The other part of the reforms we've enacted over the last 6 years that help not only our state government, but our local governments be better managers of your dollars, to better manage the state and local resources. Those things together have given us the reform dividend. They've given us a reform dividend that now we're investing, just like a business would, into our top priorities. Part of it means giving it back to the people who helped create the dividend in the first place. That's you, the hardworking taxpayers of this state. In fact, in total, income and property taxes will be down in this budget, so much so that they'll be lower in 2018 than they were before we started at the end of 2010. We actually eliminate an entire tax, so the state tax that you see on your property tax bill will be completely gone if this budget is ultimately passed the way we've introduced it. And the total amount, by the time this budget is done, so over the 8 years I will have served at the end of this budget as your governor, the total cumulative impact of the tax and fee relief we provided exceeds, it's more than $8 billion. That's right, I didn't misspeak. It's not million, it's $8 billion is the total cumulative impact of the tax relief that we've had thus far, and that will continue with the proposals we've made in the budget to continue and cut taxes and fees on the hardworking people here in the state of Wisconsin. In addition, part of the reason why we were here in the Green Bay area is to talk about STEM, to improve, particularly when it comes to today. I hear all over the state, almost all the time, people say their number one issue is workforce. You know, back in January of 2010, when I was first running to be your governor, the unemployment rate was 9.2%. As I mentioned, it's now down to 4%, the lowest it's been since January of 2001. That's a great thing to happen, but that means one of our biggest challenges going forward is workforce issues. Employers tell us all the time they have jobs, they just don't have enough people to fill those jobs. And so going forward, this budget makes heavy investments into workforce issues. Top of the list, excuse me, top of the list is more money in the K through 12 education than we've ever had before in our state's history. We also target more money on top of that, excuse me, we target more money on top of that into things like early college credit. We double the amount for Fab Labs. We do other things to help our students get not only college but career ready going forward. In addition to K through 12 education and special monies to help our rural schools and other school districts across the state, we also put more into technical colleges than we've invested ever before. We put out more than $100 million into our University of Wisconsin system, although we put additional measures in to make sure that there's a performance measure, that they actually not only put more people into school, more enrollment, but they, on top of that, have more graduates in more high-demand areas, and those people get employed, and ideally get employed here in the state of Wisconsin to help fuel our state's economy. To continue to make college affordable, we not only maintain the freeze for the first year, in the second year we add an additional $35 million. That's on top of the $100 million we put in to lower tuition by 5% for all in-state undergraduates here at all of our UW campuses, whether it's just down the way at UWGB or Madison or La Crosse or anywhere else across the state. We want to make college more affordable. And to make it at any campus, college or university across the state, we increase need-based financial assistance to the highest levels it's ever been. All that plus investments we make into infrastructure that fix our roads and our bridges and to expand high-speed internet connections via broadband to every part of the state. Those are all part of our state's budget, and they're all possible because of the reform dividend. So that's just a little update about where we're at. Let's jump into questions. First off, Kevin B. says, Governor Walker, I've heard some suggest that your recent budget spending binge is about giving people free stuff, he put in quotes, in order to even have a chance at being reelected. Why increase spending when you could have given the money back to the taxpayers? Are we to believe schools need this increase in this budget and not in the previous budget? Well, a couple different points on there, Kevin. One, as I just mentioned, we actually put more in the tax relief. In fact, in total, this budget, if approved, will lead to, as I mentioned, more than $8 billion worth of tax relief, lower income and property taxes, as well as things like a special sales tax holiday for back-to-school purchases of school supplies and clothing before families send their kids back to school. So there's all sorts of benefits to the taxpayers, to the hardworking taxpayers of the state in this budget. But really in this budget, part of the reason why we focus so much on education is because of workforce. You know, we've held listening sessions in every one of our 72 counties across the state. In addition to those, I go to events from one end of the state to the other. And the one constant thing I hear, particularly from small businesses and other employers, is that they have jobs, they just don't have enough people to fill those jobs. It's not just in manufacturing. I hear it in information technology, in healthcare. I hear it in education and finance and accounting. I hear it as well as in manufacturing and manufacturing, I should say, and construction and transportation. This has become a priority for us. And because of the Act 10 reforms we put into place nearly 6 years ago, the monies we're putting into K-12 education, we can see now will overwhelmingly, the new dollars will overwhelmingly go into the classroom. And so this is just a matter of reacting to the priorities that we've heard from people all across the state. Next question, it looks like actually the same person asked, Kevin B.S., Governor Walker, if we have all this surplus, why is it you're slowing construction on the Zoo interchange and the widening of the freeway between Milwaukee and Chicago? How can we attract businesses if the freeways that need to ship product are backed up with construction? Well, the Zoo interchange, which is in the Milwaukee County area, actually that core work, the Zoo interchange is the core of it, where people see all the barriers and the orange barrels and the construction work going on right now. That's completed in this budget. In this budget, we put enough to complete the core of the interchange. That means the work done there is done. What we don't do is take on additional projects in the Milwaukee area, such as the northern leg, which goes beyond where Watertown Plank is, where Children's Hospital and the Medical College and other places like that are at. North of that, we don't add on new work there. But for the core of the Zoo interchange, the work that people go in and out of, whether you live there or just travel through that area, that's done in this budget. We complete that in this budget. We then shift another package of money and put that into the north-south construction project from the state line up through Kenosha and Racine into southern Milwaukee County. Beyond that, though, what we do with this reform dividend is we reinvest it into our priorities, which are maintenance and safety of our existing system. So we put more money in the state highway rehabilitation than we've ever done before. We put more than ever before into aids for local roads and bridges for counties and municipal governments. In fact, they're seeing in each of those areas some of the biggest increases they've seen in the last 15 to 20 years because we want to maintain our roads and our bridges and fill our potholes and other things. We do that overwhelmingly in this budget. In fact, if you look over the 8 years that this budget will take us through of my time as your governor, in total, if this budget is approved as we've laid out, we, under our administration, will have spent $24 billion on transportation. That's about $3 billion more than Jim Doyle did, the former governor did, in the 8 years before we took office. So 8 years compared to 8 years, about $3 billion more out there. And we did it without raising the gas tax or the vehicle registration fee. Another one here is from a Shelley B., who says, this is the first time I've disagreed with you on anything. Why on earth would you not want teachers to be required to do continuing education credits? Instead of saying the classes are expensive and not worth it, why not make them affordable and relevant? lifetime teaching credentials is a horrible idea. What about the teacher who hasn't taught for 10 years and decides that they want to go back to it? Nothing has changed in 10 years, question mark, question mark. I want my child taught by someone who's up to date on current education trends and materials, not someone whose credentials sat in a drawer for 10 years. Well, we not only think it's an unnecessary administrative burden, but a couple things. One, Wisconsin was issuing lifetime teaching licenses up until 1983. So this is not a new idea, it's just come full circle. But really more important than the fact that they did it in the past is the simple fact that we actually have a very robust educator effectiveness system that we worked with the Department of Public Instruction on over the last several years. It's something that's ongoing. It means you don't have to just wait every several years until someone has to do a license renewal, but instead it's an ongoing, it's a robust living thing that continues to happen. It's also with our Act 10 reforms, we empower school districts beyond just the educator effectiveness program to adapt to things that they want teachers in their own school districts to be doing, to make sure that they're not only competent overall, but that they're uniquely filling the needs they believe students have within their school district. So instead of having this very bureaucratic system where medicine knows best and it happens over a fixed period of time, instead educator effectiveness I think is much more effective and efficient and accountable in addressing the needs that it looks like Shelley had in terms of her question. I think students are going to be better off because teachers are going to get more relevant ongoing training as opposed to just waiting for renewal of a license. Plus it'll help teachers actually save a little bit of money because there was a cost involved with that as well. Next up, Rita asked, what are you doing about the insane Republican administration in Washington, D.C.? Rita continues to say, you helped him get elected, so I hold you responsible for his actions. Well, I think actions speak louder than words, and so despite what's being said or what's being put up on Twitter, that what I'm going to look at is specifically at what this president administration do, not just what they say. And so far, there's only been a few actions out there. And for things I disagree with, certainly I'm going to speak out about them. For things I agree with, I'm going to support them on it. I look most recently at some of the action about refugees. I think it's fine to have refugees in this state and in this country. But as I said more than a year ago when President Obama was in office, and I wasn't alone, other governors, including not only Republican governors but Democrat governors, said then, as we say now, that we just want to make sure when refugees come into our states that we know that they're safe. Safe for our citizens, safe for our residents, safe for even other people coming in as refugees as well. Because unfortunately, we have seen over the years problems in Europe, in places where they didn't properly understand who was coming in and whether or not they were safe or not. And so, yes, can they do things differently? I want to make it clear I don't believe in a religious test. I believe in the test should be about safety, and it certainly is clear that they're going to have to adjust based upon some of the court decisions, how they go about doing this. But for me and other governors, it's ultimately about safety. Next is Pete E., who says, another interesting one, now that we have a president of the United States with obvious mental illness issues, do you feel emboldened to do things that might highlight your own issues? Your Twitter storm against Meryl Streep and Tammy Baldwin were embarrassing to you as well as to your constituents. For some reason, you must feel you need to mimic the childlike actions of a sick man. Well, let's look actually at what we put up on Twitter about the Supreme Court nomination that was made. Actually, I invite people to go back and look at what we put up on Gov Walker, at GOV Walker, as well as what I put on my own personal site, at Scott Walker, which is positions I put up that are on my personal Twitter feed. And what I noted there in particular was the fact that I highlighted a number of members of the United States Senate who were Democrats who had actually all made statements right after Judge Neil Gorsuch was nominated to be on the Supreme Court in the United States, and whether it was the senator from West Virginia, the senator from Indiana, the senator from Montana, the senator from even Connecticut, pointed out that they thought that at a minimum they should meet with the nominee before making a decision, and some even went so far as to say that this judge should have a vote and should have a fair shake going before the United States Senate. I pointed out that I thought that that was a reasonable position. I was surprised in pointing out that Senator Baldwin said initially when the nomination was announced that she would meet with the nominee in less than 48 hours after that. She announced that she was voting against the nominee even before having a meeting. She subsequently met with him, but that was within the first 48 hours. She said she was going to meet before anything else, and then she subsequently came back and within less than 48 hours announced she wasn't going to do that. So I just thought that a prudent person in the Senate, and I highlighted a number of other Senate Democrats to make the point, people who had said, yeah, we should actually meet with this person, particularly because if people look at the qualifications and experience of Judge Neil Gorsuch, they'll find that they're almost identical to Judge Garland, the person that President Barack Obama nominated. And we can debate or discuss whether that process should have gone one way or the other, but the fact is you can't go back in time. This is the nominee in front of the United States Senate. But if you look at the qualifications of the two, both went to the same law school, both clerked for a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals, both clerked for justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, both served in private practice, both worked in the federal government's Justice Department, and both are well-respected members of the U.S. Court of Appeals. In fact, Judge Gorsuch, just as Judge Garland had in the past, has had consistent comments pointed out by lawyers who've appeared before him, both those who were Democrats as well as Republicans, who talked about his integrity and experience. And many members, including some who've worked and supported President Obama's administration, have mentioned how highly qualified he is to be on the bench. And those are the things I pointed out. To me, I thought those were fairly reasonable observations. Next up is Angela E., who says, what plans do you have in the works to help grow small businesses in Wisconsin? Well, the good news is, as I mentioned before, the economy is heading in the right direction. We have more people employed in this state this past year than ever before. Unemployment's at a 16-year low. Overall employment amongst adults is one of the highest in the nation. We've actually seen, since I've taken over as your governor, business startups have grown dramatically. We've seen all sorts of benefits out there, but we want to continue that. And so part of it is continuing the things that have got us to this positive situation, part of what created this reform dividend, and that is continuing to put more money back in the hands of individual consumers and small business operators, doing more to rein in out-of-control regulations, to enforce common sense but not bureaucratic red tape, to do more what we've done in the past to stop frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits, but also to do a fair amount of what I was just talking about a few moments ago and a couple of questions ago, and that is talk about and do things that help enhance the workforce. Because workforce development, I believe, increasingly has become economic development. That small businesses or any other sized employers need to have confidence that they've got quality employees or prospective employees out there. And so we're going to continue to invest more in our schools, our technical colleges, our UW system, and even our worker training programs to make sure we have enough workers to help us build and create new small businesses. We're also doing more in this budget to help create access to capital via the private sector and otherwise. That's one of the things we hear from small businesses to grow. They need to have access to capital, and particularly in rural parts, to make sure that every part of the state has access to high-speed internet connections through broadband, through a fiber network, which we're making a giant leap forward in this budget. So great question there, Angela. Next up says, Alex H. says, Governor Walker, would you consider a second bid for the White House? I was very interested in your campaign and agree with your politics. Well, for me, I'm focused on Wisconsin. If anything, I'd likely run for re-election for governor in 2016. I like where we're headed. I think the future is incredibly bright in the state. I think it's not happened yet, but my hope would be with a new president, administration, and a Congress, I'd like to think that they'd be more open to sending responsibilities and resources, as our founders intended, back to the states and to local governments, and most importantly, back to the people. And if that happens, I very much am interested in what we could do, not only during the next, well, less than 2 years that remains in my term as your governor right now, but I'd like to think that would be very appealing, at least to me, to think about building off of that and doing even more good for all the people of this state for 4 years thereafter. But as I've said before, I won't make an announcement on that until after the budget is completed, which hopefully will be sometime by midsummer. Next up, Mike H. says, will you defund sanctuary cities in Wisconsin? Well, of course, when it comes to immigration, that's a federal law, and I would presume this administration, as previous administrations have done some some efforts to enforce those laws. From what the President and others have said, it appears they're going to attempt to do more. That's really a federal responsibility. There have been some measures being kicked around, at least in the state capitol, about things that might happen in the future. We'll have to look at that. One of the ideas that sounds like it might come to the forefront is not specifically just about sanctuary cities, but about communities and whether or not they respect requests from the federal government to detain individuals who broke laws other than just immigration. Certainly that's an area of a lot of attention and focus and a lot of concern out there, and that's likely to come up. And as we have future Facebook Live sessions, we'll give you an update as we hear about those proposed pieces of legislation. Bob B. asked, why do you insist on calling these things live? Well, because as you saw a minute ago, they are. In fact, here, my Fitbit, if you can see it, it says it's 5:12 on the 17th. In fact, actually, it said, February 17th, and I've got, just as an interesting insight, almost 13,000 steps in my Fitbit as well there. So maybe I'll do a couple laps on Lambeau Field and get over 13,000 after this. Let's see. Next up, Angela C. says, you recently announced that you're planning, these are her words, to violate the state code of ethics by accepting a gift of an Alaskan cruise. Please read section 19.45 of the state code of ethics and respond to explain how you pay for your own family vacation rather than accepting gifts and therefore violating the public trust. Well, obviously, I'm very familiar with the state ethics code. I don't ever accept anything personally unless it's cleared by the ethics law. And at this point, in fact, on this particular issue that was raised here, I received an invitation, and I'm waiting for a decision by the state's ethics commission as to whether or not we can participate in speaking at the particular thing that was referenced. But that's pending, and it'll be brought up, and I'll only do it if they ultimately give us the approval per the state ethics laws. Next up, Gerald M. says, please, Governor, share what you have learned at these meetings with the public. For example, is your new and more responsive approach to education because of the input from these carefully choreographed meetings. I'm assuming Gerald's talking about our listening sessions, for which, as I mentioned, we held them in every county in the state. We invited a cross-section of people from high school students and teachers and superintendents to retirees, farmers, small business owners, veterans, healthcare professionals, clergy, you name it. We had different ages, different professions, different political beliefs we had at these sessions, as some have reported on. Even actually had one of them, somebody who signed the recall, as I recall. We didn't know that, but somebody else pointed out after the session. The idea being that we wanted to get a cross-section of people and an idea of where people all across the state would like to be over the next 20 years. These listening sessions, along with the other things I've heard from people, particularly small business owners and other employers, talked about the need for a positive workforce. I also heard from people all across the state, not only constituents, but a lot of people who are personal friends, particularly in Wauwatosa, where Tonette and I raised our two sons, Matt and Alex. They went all the way through Wauwatosa Public Schools, and now one is a senior at the University of Wisconsin. The others graduated from college and works here in Wisconsin. What we heard all over was people said, hey, you know, these reforms probably were very necessary, but we'd like to see what the next step is. And so that's the beauty of the reform dividend. We responded to what we heard at listening sessions. We responded to what others said. We think it's reasonable to invest in education and higher education, but tying it to performance. That's what making sure that people comply with Act 10 in every district is all about. That's what putting performance measures in for new funding in the University of Wisconsin system is all about. We want to make investments in areas that are priorities, but we want to make sure those dollars go into the classrooms and actually provide an opportunity for student success for all of our students across the state. Looks like we've got time for a couple more here. Let's see, Elizabeth here looks like she's actually got a couple. How do you plan to ensure that the public school system systems become and remain a stable career choice for prospective educators? Well, a couple different things. Obviously, in the larger sense, the historic levels of investment in K through 12 education is important. The renewed focus in helping the unique challenges of rural school districts are important. Some of the other things we're doing, specifically we're at listening sessions about concerns in schools, about mental health issues. You know, a couple budgets ago, we put more money into mental health services provided via our counties than any governor has in the last 25 years. But we're hearing about increasingly the need in schools. And so we put more dollars to address mental health issues, which obviously is important for the students, but I also think, having heard from a number of teachers who said, boy, you got to help us deal with these issues so that that we don't have disturbances in the classroom, and help us deal in a more responsive way with these unique needs out there. We also included a couple other provisions in the budget, things like having the UW system use the UW Flex option, not only for areas like engineering and healthcare, but to expand it for education, so that people who might be working in the schools as paraprofessionals, sometimes called teacher aides, could actually go on and get a degree in education and become a teacher without having to spend a whole semester, a year on a campus somewhere, but actually test via competency into credits from things they've learned while helping in the classroom, as well as take other credits they may have already earned or earned online. So we're trying to do a number of things. Even the changes we're making in terms of licensure, and instead going toward this more robust educator effectiveness program that measures and encourages ongoing educational updates. All those things, I think, help very much along the way. A couple other quick ones. Elizabeth said, well, it's another one from Elizabeth on Twitter. Can you tell me with absolute surety, she said, that the quality of my son's education in my state will improve rather than decline? Well, Elizabeth, I share your concern, just as I did when my kids went to Roosevelt Elementary, Longfellow Middle School, and Wauwatosa East High School. Just as my nieces, Matt and Alex went and graduated from those public schools. My nieces, Isabella and Eva, are in public schools today. My brother David and I went to public schools in the Delaware Darien School District. I want great schools, public or otherwise, for every student, for every child in this state. In terms of guaranteeing, no, I don't think anyone can guarantee, but I can say that not only are we putting historic amounts of new investments into K through 12 education, the highest amount ever, but as I've said repeatedly before, more money in and of itself is not the answer. What it needs to be is prudently invested. Because of Act 10, because of the requirements we put that all school districts have to use and embrace the reforms in Act 10 that have not only helped us balance budgets, but helped us with simple things like school districts no longer have to use seniority in terms of staffing. They can hire based on merit. They can pay based on performance. That means they can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms. And we've seen, a year ago, we went into, we're one of now about, less than 20 states where every one of our students takes the ACT test. We provide it for free in 11th grade. We think that's fundamentally important to get a good measure out there. And it's just as we've been in the past under the previous ACT test, we continue to be one of the top states in that category. Our graduation rates are some of the highest in the nation. And so we think these new investments, higher than ever before, combined with our reforms, not only from Act 10, but even some of the reforms that are included in this budget, will make it easier for our exceptional teachers in this state, our principals, our superintendents, and other educators to do a good job with students like yours and others across the state. Looks like we've got time for about one more. It's about a half an hour in. We want to keep to our commitment. A couple more here from Elizabeth. Let's see, what other ones do you have? Actually, I had a completely different topic here. Someone asked about Jimmy P.O., I guess it is, on Twitter, said higher education and inpatient mental health options in DOC, that must be in the Department of Corrections, most eliminated tech certificates and monitored PSY would reduce recidivism, ? Actually, our budget makes a number of investments, if you address the issues here, to improve both physical and mental health treatment in many different areas. I talked about that in our schools, but also in the Department of Corrections. We also greatly expand higher education opportunities, mainly because we know there's tremendous workforce needs out there. And so we started a few years ago, specifically with the Milwaukee Area Technical College, where things as simple as just training people to be CNC operators. We've had great success there. There's a whole bunch of other areas. We dramatically increased that. Our partnerships with higher education, helping the Department of Corrections, because we know there's a high demand for more people with the skills needed to fill these positions. We also know that if someone has a skill that allows them to get employed upon release, the chances of them repeating go down pretty dramatically. So it's good for employers who need workers. Most of all, it's good for taxpayers who hopefully we can keep that person out of recycling back into the system. But most of all, it's good for the individual. And so in all the things we've talked about, whether it's with corrections, whether it's in welfare reform, whether it's in education or higher education, overwhelmingly we're using this reform dividend to reinvest in our priorities, and that's helping to build and sustain a quality workforce here in the state, not just for the sake of a workforce, but because in turn that will help us continue to create a reform dividend to invest in our priorities going forward. Again, this is, like I said, been a half an hour in. We'll continue to do this each month. It's a great opportunity to hear from people across the state and interact directly with you. Sun's going down here at Lambeau, but it never really goes down on a true Packers fan. We are always optimistic for next year. We'd love to bring one more Lombardi trophy back home to where it belongs in Lambeau Field to join with all the other Lombardi and Thorpe trophies here in Lambeau Field. I invite you to come by here and visit, as well as visit travelwisconsin.com to find out about other places, not only here in Green Bay and Brown County, but all across the great state of Wisconsin. Thanks for joining us.